All right, and we're back with the show once again. It's Gerald coming right back at you here. Well, Avengers Endgame is still smacking down those records. It is at the time we speak the number two film of all time, garnering right around $2.2 billion, which is just amazing in and of itself. In it, basically a little over 2 weeks now, it has garnered that type of enthusiasm. Well, actually, I'm sorry, in a little under 2 weeks, it has generated and garnered that type of enthusiasm and excitement all around the world, just shattering box office records left and right. And with Avengers Endgame being how it is and being a certain demise for some of the beloved characters within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, one question now rises to the forefront, and that is, where do we go from here, and who do we go with as far as new people to get into the Avengers fray, new superheroes that we're kind of interested in, that we would like to see get involved or more involved if they're already somewhat, started or just been sprinkled, it's just been sprinkled in there a little bit as of now, who we'd like to see become a major part of the next wave of Marvel Cinematic Universe films. And here to talk with me today about that is a great man indeed, because he's got an awesome show, which you got to catch now on SoundCloud and so many other different outlets. It's the Pop Anime Comics Lounge. And I've got the voice of the Pop Anime Comics Lounge right here with me. It's Andrew David. What's going on, my friend?
I'm good. I'm good. And now I feel pressure on me after that introduction.
Oh no,
So,
don't feel any pressure. It's always just a great conversation. We talked wrestling last time you were on the show. Don't get me started on wrestling right now, because the state of wrestling is I don't know. It's not as good as many would say. I think we're in kind of a little bit of a lull, as far, especially because the ratings that dictate that. Because I think there's still not that one or two singular, stars that are generating that type of excitement at this point in time. But you know what? Pro wrestling, it comes in waves. It, ebbs and tides, highs and lows. Hopefully, by the time SmackDown comes onto Fox, they'll go ahead and be that star that goes ahead and transcends to a larger audience, that gets that excitement back for casual fans alike. But there's a lot of great things to talk about in pop culture. Game of Thrones is just enthralling fans all over, if they can actually see through the long night and all that, because the last episode was very very dark. But there is the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I described exactly how well it's doing. It's the number two film of all time. I'm hoping, keeping my fingers crossed, that it gets to number one. But that's a bigger story for another day, whether or not it'll reach that plateau. I want to know from you, my friend, thoughts on where do you think the Marvel Cinematic Universe should go from here? We've got a good idea about films for that are coming up in the near future, but there's going to be a lot of heroes that are new or have been underutilized so far in Marvel Cinematic Universe, that need to be integrated more and need to be integrated to become a major part of the future. So I want to hear your thoughts on where do you think the Marvel Cinematic Universe is going to go from here, and who do you think is going to play a key role in it?
so before I give anybody who I would like to see in it, I would just like to state that I think the MCU is now entering a new phase, and I think that they need to go a little more indie and a little bit more outside the box because we've gone through the core characters in Marvel in the last, I guess, 10 to 11 years now. And so we've gone through the Captain America, the Iron Man. We've gone through a bunch of Spider-Man now. We've gone through Thor. We've gone through parts of the Hulk. And now we need to go more indie. And I think one of the things, characters like Moon Knight, for instance, and even Nova, who's been rumored and was teased in Guardians. But I think we need to go with things that have done very well for Marvel as comics. I mean, one of the things that is problematic for the MCU, and it's unpopular, but Captain Marvel, while it was a successful movie, the comic book has plummeted about 72% by issue 3. And one of the problems that Marvel's having between their comic books and the MCU is that they're going in one direction, while the comic world is going in a different direction. And I think that's where Marvel needs to go with the next installments of the MCU. And characters like Moon Knight, I would love to see a Moon Knight film.
Well,
I would love
it's just hard, and you've noticed this, that the general audience just does not. One of the things that was hoped for by Marvel was to go ahead and get more people talking about comic books and get them more involved. And unfortunately, it's been just the opposite, because over the 10 plus years the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been out, it looks like even with the integration of the digital nature and technology and things of that nature, the Marvel app, the DC app, et cetera, it looks like the comic book universe has suffered greatly under the weight of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
So I think it was either in 2016 or 2017, there was a loss of $70 million in comics. And I think, though, that to argue, and it's a little bit outside the point, but I think companies like Image have risen up. And while the MC universe has damaged comic books, I think Image and Dark Horse and Zenscope and other companies have actually risen and have increased their positions. And so what I would like to see with the MC universe is I would like to see them do the Walking Dead style, where it benefits the comic book, where the Walking Dead TV show really does help the comic book. And I think that's something that the MC universe has actually failed to do. And I think DC is also somewhat failing to do that as well. And so there are certain characters, and one of the characters I would like to see, and it's a little bit out there, but I would like to see a Squirrel Girl comic movie. And I would like to see it very similar to the style of Deadpool, where while she doesn't know that she's in a comic book, it would have that same vibe and that same making fun of itself. And I think that's what's missing in the Marvel MCU at the moment, is that we don't have movies that know they're a comic movie and they're treating themselves as if they are like an action thriller. And it's fun to have those big explosions, and it's fun to have the superhero stuff and how Endgame played out. And if you haven't seen Endgame, I'm not going to ruin too much for you, but certain people die, and certain people are 86th off. But nonetheless, and it is an end of an era, but I think that these things are taking themselves a little too seriously. And I think we need to go back to that humor that Deadpool interjected as far as films. And I think that would benefit comic books. I think it would be a wave of difference now. Because if you look at a movie like Black Panther, Captain Marvel, Captain America Civil War 3, Iron Man 3, I mean, those movies are really similar to each other with slight modifications. Endgame and Infinity Wars are very different than those four that I just described, but those four movies are extremely similar. And even Thor 3 and Thor 2 were similar. And so I think that's the problem with the MC universe, is that I think the next 4 or 5 movies are just going to be bad in that.
That's a shame that that's the case, because it's speculated that some of those 4 or 5 next movies could be, most likely be, first off, a Black Widow movie that is most likely at this point in time. I can't say any spoilers because we're going to go non-spoiler for this conversation. That could possibly be set in the background, in the past, as far as possibly even the vaunted Budapest situation. There's also talk of the Eternals, because Angelina Jolie has been signed to do that type of project, so that looks like it's something on the way. Shang-Chi, which I've said before on the show, and is my sincerest hope, will reignite the Western culture's passion for the martial arts film, since he's the master of the martial arts. I really hope that will just get people involved and excited for martial arts films once again. Then you also have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, Doctor Strange 2, Captain Marvel 2, Black Panther 2. Those are obvious ones because the money that they've already generated for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So as you and I both know, Disney loves the cashola. So they've got to go ahead and make the safe play. And I would too. If I'm leading Disney and I see a property like Captain Marvel that's made over $1.1 billion, and I see a property like Black Panther that's made over $1.4 billion that have and I know those characters are going to be a part of the future going forward. Yeah, I'd go ahead and greenlight those films really, really quickly. It's the films like The Eternals and Shang-Chi, which are lesser known properties, which I think, like you said, has everybody concerned not only about the quality but the perception out there. But I think Marvel, like you said, more indie properties, more lesser known properties might get a chance to shine if they're integrated into some of these movies, but also if they might have their own movies as well, because they have a track record of it if it's done properly, with like what happened with Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah, I agree. And I think also one of the things that's going to be fascinating moving forward is that we're now in an era where LBGTQ is relevant. And I'm saying this, and I know it can be possibly misinterpreted to some degree, but I think it's relevant to talk about it bluntly. One of the things that's happening with DC, and it's a little bit off track, but they've incorporated that well into their streaming service. And I think that's something that's going to happen with a bunch of characters. I mean,
Valkyrie has been talked about. That character has definitely made her statement in regards to that. Even director Joe Russo in Avengers Endgame alluded to something of that nature. You got to check it out and why, but yes, he did allude to something into that realm and basically introduce that the LGBTQ type of culture in there as far as from that standpoint is concerned. So yes, that could definitely be a big part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe going forward.
and one of the things that I think is going to be interesting, and I think it's maybe 8 to 10 years out, but Cinegrace just created a character that is the first drag mutant character. And that's going to be hitting, it either hit like last month or it's going to be hitting the next 2 or 3 months. And the story behind that was he casually introduced that in because Iceman came out as gay in 2015. And what actually happened in the comic world, and this is relevant, I think, to the film world, given that Marvel has a track history of appeasing and kind of taking, what they know is going to make money, which is partially why the MCU is getting complicated and is slightly messed up, which is a different conversation altogether. But the president of the MCU has basically made statements, despite Captain Marvel failing miserably as a comic, it was successful as a movie. And they've placated the comic book to the movie, which is something that Marvel is doing, which is creating a whole complicated problem. But I think that's something to pay attention to, where this drag queen mutant that was created, I think is going to impact the X-Men franchise. And I think that, we're obviously getting Dark Phoenix, and I think in the next, and while the X-Men aren't necessarily integrated right now into the Marvel MCU, I mean, that's coming down the pike. And
I think it is. But I think they're going to go for the Fantastic Four first, because I think that is the entity and property that I think needs the most assistance.
Without a doubt. I mean, the Fantastic Four has been damaged beyond a point of that it's literally hanging on by a thread. I mean, we had two Fantastic Four movies done before, and then we had
actually.
Well, we don't count the third. We don't count the third that just came out because that was a train wreck.
Well, actually, you should, because it's in that point. Had Fantastic Four been such a successful property, maybe it would have changed the minds of Fox to go ahead and seek out the type of merger that it did with Disney. And same thing goes for the X-Men. It's declining returns at the box office. After Old Man Logan was a great success for an R-rated movie. Obviously, we saw what went on with Deadpool and the success it had. But some of the other returns for the declining X-Men movies after Days of Future Past have not been promising. X-Men Apocalypse did not do well at all, and there's not great hopes for Dark Phoenix now, especially since it seems like a lame duck series at this point in time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that definitely impacts Fox's position on part of that, as well as I think Fox also just saw an opportunity to just get out because TV is a nightmare, and I think that that's something that we're also seeing with Disney. I mean, the thing that is fascinating is, I mean, look at what happened with Netflix and Marvel just recently, and even though that's not the MCU, I mean, I think that also opens up a lot of opportunities where we just had a successful Daredevil series. We had a pretty successful Luke Cage series. Jessica Jones was great. And then we had The Punisher for 2 seasons. And now I don't know what exactly is happening with all those things, but all those things were successful. And I wouldn't mind seeing some of that stuff in the MCU.
I noticed you didn't mention Danny Rand as Iron Fist.
Yeah, we don't talk about that.
Mum's the word on that one.
I
But
saw
yeah,
the first episode and I just couldn't. I couldn't. I just couldn't. And then I'll be the first person to say, maybe I should have gave it more credit and went to episode 2, but that thing was just really hard to watch.
and like you, a lot of other people said the same thing as well, especially the first season. Even though the second season, by many accounts, got better, it wasn't good enough to sustain itself, and it did get the axe. There could be a time where those Marvel superheroes from the Netflix series get integrated into maybe a Hulu series or maybe even into some parts of the Marvel Cinematic Universe out of respect to those actors and to the work that they did into some small fashion. I know we're going to get another Ghost Rider spinoff. I believe it's going to be on Hulu. I know that's been talked about as well, and of course, somewhere in this format, Agents of Shield lies in there. Whether or not it's so loose, I think it's like the loosest interpretation of being integrated into the Marvel Cinematic Universe that you could possibly do, where it's integrated, but at a very, very, very loose point where it's kind of on its it's virtually on its own. And maybe that's for good reason for many fans who just don't even watch the show anymore or who never did and never tuned in. But you're right. The future going forward for this type of integration has to be there. And it's going to be there for the Disney Plus series that comes out later this year starting with, I think, starting out maybe, I don't think it's going to come out right away, but sometime next year we're going to see what, Winter Soldier and Falcon. We're going to see WandaVision, as they call it. We're going to see Hawkeye at some point in time. So
Loki.
maybe Loki. Obviously, that's going to be something there with Tom Hiddleston. They could tell the story of what he's doing and so much more. It looks like that's a good way to do it. I still would love to see a Nick Fury and Maria Hill type deal. That would be awesome to see that point. Maybe rebuilding Shield or the Avengers Initiative. That would be kind of cool to me. But I know there's some other individuals out there. A War Machine series could be talked about as well. But what do you see going forward in the future as far as the Marvel Cinematic Universe? I know you spoke of some heroes like Moon Knight, Nova. I know we're going to see Adam Warlock at some point in time because he was teased in GOTG Volume 2. I know there's still many more heroes that you'd like to see going forward in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
I mean, to be honest, what I would love to see is I would love to see like Miles Morales, and I would love to see almost like an Ultimate Clash. And I think that could be so interesting where we have the Ultimate Universe and everything that took place. And I mean, I'm thinking maybe 10 years out I think it could be a lead up similar to Civil War, going into Infinity Wars, into Endgame, and I think that could be almost Marvel's 10-year plan out, where we start to throw things like that down, because I don't foresee another major event that could compete with something like that. And it would also hit a lot of points on Marvel's checklist of diversity, of being representative. And I'm going to say something that's controversial, but right now diversity makes money. I was hinting at it before, and that's what Marvel's looking for in some
Absolutely,
degree.
I agree with you on that. It's shown in the past 2 years that definitely is the case.
And so I would like to see Miles Morales. I'd like to see that, because I think if that's done right, or even an Ultimates movie type thing, because I think that would be awesome. And that would be like a guilty pleasure. especially considering, Bendis wrote that stuff. And so
Absolutely.
and so as a comic fan, and as given the fact that Spider-Verse did so well, and we're getting Spider-Verse 2, and that's not MCU, but I think the popularity is there. And I think it would just be like a guilty pleasure for every fan, and I think it would just make a killing at the box office.
Well, that could be a great future for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Obviously, they have, obviously they have, obviously they have what's going on with Spider-Man. He's not only well integrated into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but also big plans ahead for Tom Holland and what's going on with Far From Home coming up from Sony. And it's basically what Sony's going to allow Marvel to do because they own the rights to it. Because as you know, there's a lot coming up for the Spider-Verse because of the success of Venom. They're now full steam ahead with wanting to go ahead and produce more movies within that Spider-Verse and have their own type of universe away from the Marvel Cinematic Universe with Spider-Man, with a Miles Morales that's going ahead and lead hopefully a new version of Spider-Man in maybe an alternate timeline, alternate universe, or maybe even the same one integrating with Tom Holland's Spider-Man. You've got Morbius with Jared Leto. You've got obviously Venom 2 coming up at some point in time with Tom Hardy. So there are a lot of great options coming up there as well. I'd like to see all of them more integrated into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but I know there's going to be at some point Sony wants to go ahead and build its own separate universe that people will go ahead and see. And Tom Holland, and hopefully, like you said, Miles Morales being those integrated pieces that can be in both the Sony Spider-Verse and also the Marvel Cinematic Universe as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think that at a certain point, I think this MCU is going to break. I think theoretically in Endgame, they could have broke it, and I don't want to spoil anything, but there was an opportunity, and I think Marvel's going to have to do this, where I think there's going to have to be the MCU-A, for lack of a better word, and the MCU-B, where I don't know at what point, but I think as a company and as a monetary decision, because when you have 22 movies, every step you take with the next movie becomes complicated because it's what impact does it have on everything that's happened 22 times before. And I think at a certain point, they're going to have to reboot this. And I don't think they're going to want to reboot it the way that comics get rebooted. I think what they're going to have to do is they're going to have a definitive split where this is going in one direction and this is a new universe, and this is going in the next direction, and an event caused the split. And I think that's what is going to eventually happen. I don't think it's going to happen in phase 4. I think it's going to happen in phase 5. And I know we're talking 5-6 years down the road, but I think there's going to be tracks starting to have to be laid for that, because I don't see it being economically sustainable. And we could be like, oh, 2.2 billion, 1.4 billion. But after a while, these stories are going to get so tangled up that what happens in Black Panther 2 is going to affect Captain Marvel 2. It's going to affect Guardians 3. And then they're going to contradict each other in the middle of the movie. And it might not happen in that order, but when you start adding 30, 40, movies to this collection, at a certain point, there's going to be contradictions from Avengers 1. And this audience is going to be PO'd about it.
Well, there's still actually to this day, I mean, when people go ahead and check out Endgame, I'm not going to say any specific spoilers, but there are certain little things in there that already are kind of contradictions already to what happened and what took place in the Marvel Cinematic Universe already. There are certain characters, certain events that kind of tweak things to the narrative of Endgame that are different or could have been or was made different in previous installments of the Marvel Cinematic Universe already. But you're right, there could be some egregious and some bigger issues that are created with some timelines, like for instance, Spider-Man Homecoming, with the amount of years that took place after the original events of the Battle of New York. The timeline was completely thrown off by their decision of, I think it was 7 years or something like that, when it actually was a little bit more than that. So that in itself was kind of thrown off right there. But we could be seeing more mistakes like that coming up in the future, like you said, after 30, 40, even 50 films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
And so I just think we're going to have a breaking point, and I think it's going to be real fun because it's going to be like a fork in the road. And I think that would ultimately, especially with the money now, because they have the money to do that. When they first started phase one, there wasn't money here. And we could say, well, Disney had money and Marvel had money and all these other people had money. They didn't have the money they have now. And I think that's what's going to happen because I think it's going to be so outrageous and there's just going to be too many mistakes that now what's going to happen is that when you have a split and a definitive split, you then can go from the same starting point, but then you can massively tweak a world. And because writing these things are now getting harder.
Absolutely.
As far as the movie goes in directing, because if you're a writer, you now need to understand what happened in Endgame affects Guardians 3. And you now need to have a back history. And it's not that complicated per se, but it is still complicated. And when then you have Guardians 3 and then you're going to get an Adam Warlock in there, you need to know what happened in Guardians 2 and then Guardians 3, and then you need to understand Endgame, and then you need to understand what's going on in Captain Marvel, and now you have 5 movies building to that's an offshoot for a 6th movie. You need to know what you're doing. But then if you keep adding things into that, I mean, not going to say who's still alive, but we have to talk about with Spider-Man Homecoming. There's no way that the events in Endgame don't have an impact on that movie.
Absolutely, and I know it will be a big part of that going forward, as far as at least like you said with Spider-Man Far From Home coming up later on here in a couple months down the road. But yeah, there's a lot to look forward to. Once again, I'm talking to Andrew David from the Pop Anime Comics Lounge. You can catch his show on SoundCloud and so many other different podcast outlets. One last question I got to talk to you, my friend, because it's been so awesome to talk to you about the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But why do people need to check out the Pop Anime Comics Lounge on SoundCloud and so many other podcast outlets?
I'm an interviewer, and I interview a lot of people who I catch them at the right time, and a bunch of them have gone on to do bigger and better things. And it's always fun to be growing with somebody than to be trying to catch up to what they have done. And I've done it in the comic world. I've done it with voice actors. I've done it with wrestlers. I've done it with cosplayers. And it's really cool when you do somebody 6 months or a year out before they become big, and then you're ahead of the curve, and that you recognize their name, and then all of a sudden, with a wrestler, they are now at the height of their career, and you were there before everybody else, and you got to know who they were, and then they appear, and you're like, oh, now I get it. And so that's what I do, and I do it a lot more than I realize. And I think I have like 60 interviews where I call people right before they became big. And if you were listening to my show, and I don't mean you personally, but I mean everybody who's listening, you would also be aware of who they are. And then out of nowhere, you see their career just skyrocket almost overnight. And so that's a really good reason to listen to me. And also, I'm really entertaining, and it's just a fun thing, and it's just something to play in the background, and it'll take your mind off of cool stuff. It'll take your mind off of difficult things and replace it with a lot of cool, fun, entertaining, and knowledge, and you're just getting to know cool people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a great show. I cannot recommend it any higher. You got to check it out today. It's the Pop Anime Comics Lounge. Again, it's the Pop Anime Comics Lounge. It is available on SoundCloud or wherever podcasts. You can just go ahead and find it. Just type it. It's all one word. Pop Anime Comics Lounge. One word. It's not a typo. It's all in there. It's Pop Anime Comics Lounge. It's all one thing. It's available today on SoundCloud, all of his great interviews, and so many other different podcast outlets. Well, Andrew, I got to get you back on the show sometime down the road very, very soon because of the fact we got to talk more wrestling. Because, like I said, that's for another day. Another day. Also, as well, anything going on with comics or anything going on with anime. I know anime is something that a lot of people have a great interest in. Obviously, Netflix and their influence as far as upon the marketplace has kickstarted a revival or a movement towards anime becoming a more popular entity. So definitely we have to go ahead and sit down and chat about that as well. Just truly amazing to talk to you each and every time. And I can't thank you enough for being part of the show. Any last thoughts on the way out?
No, I'm just happy to talk, and I'm happy to talk about anything pop culture because I love it, and pop culture dictates everything.
I think it does too as well. Those were great words indeed. Just great to have you on the show, my friend. Again, it's Andrew David. Check out his shows today on the Pop Anime Comics Lounge show on SoundCloud and so many other different outlets. Andrew, it's great to have you part of the show, and of course, right here, a part of the pop culture cosmos.